Trans Day of Remembrance is held every November 20th to memorialise those who have been killed due to transphobic violence. For years, I've been so frightened of being murdered for being trans. The discussion around trans issues so much revolves around the trans murder epidemic, and I understand that it's mostly sex workers and it's mostly women of colour, but it's still framed as a trans murder epidemic where people are being killed just for being trans. I feel this anxiety has really contributed to the trauma of transitioning. This idea that I've been risking my life the whole time. There are plenty of other problems, plenty of other risks, plenty of other traumas, but am I at a high risk for murder? The TDAW website says that trans people on the list were killed due to anti-transgender hatred or prejudice, so this doesn't include suicide. Suicide due to transphobia is a pretty big deal in our community, but it's not one of the things we memorialise with TDAW. It is for people who were murdered. And these lists get a lot of media attention, and these numbers get a lot of media attention every year. But if you go through the list, a lot of these murders have very ambiguous motivations, and others just have nothing to do with transness at all. Despite the level of transphobia in the UK these days, very, very few trans women have been murdered over the last decade, just a couple. A woman named Jacqueline Cowdery was apparently murdered in 2014, but there was no evidence as to how she was murdered. There was also no evidence that she was murdered for being trans, and in the end it turned out that there was no evidence that she was murdered at all. They have no idea why she died, but she's counted on the list of those murdered due to transphobia on the TDAW list. Eli or Ellie Washtok was an amateur sleuth who was investigating a mysterious murder, and while investigating, they turned up dead, apparently possibly because they were getting too close to the truth. There's no evidence that had anything to do with Washtok being trans. 4 trans women were killed by the police in 2019 because they were going to testify against the cops for human trafficking. TDAW 2019 lists Jordan Coffer, who was the sibling of the Dayton shooter, who killed 8 other apparently cisgender people as well, and we have no idea whether or not he intended to kill Jordan at all. In 2018, Flavia Luisa died on an aeroplane due to respiratory problems, apparently due to silicone poisoning from a cosmetic procedure. Flavia Luisa is now listed as killed due to anti-transgender prejudice. Keep in mind that anyone who commits suicide due to transphobia is not on the list and is not memorialised, but Flavia Luisa is. This isn't anything new either. I found in the 2005 book Sex Change, Social Change that at the time some trans women were added to the list, but it turned out those trans women had been killed by murderers who were out to kill sex workers and were killing other cisgender sex workers as well, and it didn't seem to have anything to do with their transness. All of these deaths are serious and tragic, but when TDAW is framed as these people were killed due to transphobia, that's just incredibly dishonest and an injustice to those people whose names were used. So when I had gone through this list and found that some of these trans women were being killed for sometimes fairly ambiguous reasons, and other times just flat out unrelated reasons, I decided to look into the statistics. I have noticed that when you get an infographic about trans murder, they don't compare the trans statistics to the cisgender equivalents. The national murder rate in the US is about 0.005%. So that means that about 0.005% of all people are being murdered each year. Best estimates show that 1.4 to 9 million US Americans are identifying as transgender. So if 30 trans people were killed in 2019 out of 1.4 million, that's 0.002%, while 30 trans people out of 9 million is about 0.0003%. So if these numbers are anything to go by, it seems like the trans community is not being killed as often as the general population, and certainly not more than the general population. People often say that trans murder rates go underreported, but if this is the case, we have to at the very least more than double the amount of murders for it to even match up with the general population murder rate. I don't know why this is, but it does seem like there's not really a trans murder epidemic happening. I think the main difference between trans numbers and cis numbers here is that trans numbers are being shown on infographics and cis numbers are not. For trans people overall, they're not being killed at a higher rate than the general population. However, for black people, for women of colour, for migrants, for sex workers, That's not the case. 90% of trans murder cases in 2019 were trans women of colour. Homicide rate for black women in America is much higher than it is for white women. TDAW numbers show consistently that trans black women are the majority of the victims. In 2019, 61% of the victims were known to be sex workers. Sex workers are 60 to 100 times more likely to be murdered than the general population. That same year, according to the December 17th memorial list for sex workers, 12% of those sex workers murdered were black trans women. Within sex work, trans women are experiencing significantly more violence than their cis counterparts. But if trans people were at risk for murder just for being trans, you would expect to see a lot more white people, a lot more men, and a lot fewer sex workers. So why are so many people so misinformed about this trans murder epidemic? I don't know for sure, but I think this idea that trans people are constantly at risk for murder has increased empathy generally towards us. If you think that I could be murdered any day, you might have a little bit more respect for my choice to transition. There may also be benefits to the NGO sector. The country with the highest number of trans women being killed right now is actually Brazil, but most of the funding goes to the US. Now, the fact that we're getting a lot of money for trans activism is great. And when you apply for funding, you put down major issues that the minority you're supporting is facing. So you will mention, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what city you live in, no matter what country you live in, you will mention that there is a trans murder epidemic, and maybe that's helpful. So is this massive amount of funding helping? Well, it doesn't seem like it's helping at all. It actually seems like the numbers of murders are actually going up annually. And I would think because it is at an intersection of experiences that these murders are happening. It's not happening just for being trans. So if you eliminate transness from the equation, these women are still at high risk. It seems that the women who are already disproportionately suffering from issues such as poverty are then further marginalized by their transness due to high rates of unemployment. Transphobia may not kill very often, but it does put someone at an economic disadvantage. However, this happens at an intersection of economic disadvantages rather than just universally putting all trans people at a risk of poverty. But does this all make a difference to how we see TDAW? Even if these people weren't murdered for being trans, aren't they our dead and we should be remembering our dead? Yeah, for sure, absolutely. But I'm not sure that they are my dead. It feels wrong for me to be claiming this situation which has nothing to do with my experience of the world or demographic. I'm not at risk in the same way they are, and the reasons that they're primarily at risk has nothing to do with the transness that we have in common. If most of the people killed were not trans, there's still a pretty good chance that they would have been subject to very high rates of violence and murder. Every year on Trans Day of Remembrance, people come together all over the world to remember the dead. They light candles and they read a list of names. And those names are so far removed from who those people were. For the most part, all that's remembered is their name, their transness, and how they were murdered. Sometimes people have tried to change this, but as far as I've seen, attempts haven't been very successful. If it were me, I don't think I would want this. I don't think I would want to be added to this list and for that to become my legacy. And no one can consent to this. No one can say beforehand, or I don't think anyone ever has said beforehand, like, I want to be on this list if I get murdered. Like, no one can consent to being on here. No one can aspire to be on here. No one would ever want to be on here. And as we've seen earlier in the video, there are some people on this list who just shouldn't really be on here at all. If this is right for you, if you want to do that, that's up to you. It's a very personal experience, and I think it should be a personal experience. But for me, I just pay my respects in a different way. Until recently, I really thought that transitioning had put me at a much higher risk for murder, because that's just how it's framed, that it's about all of us, #trans lives matter. But that's an appropriation of violence that isn't happening to people like me, and I just don't think that's fair. In the past, I just every year just tried to sort of sadly accept TDAW and get on with my life, because this is so fucking scary, and so many people are so frightened when they are not part of this demographic at all. They're not at risk. And that's an honest mistake, because it doesn't occur to anyone that this might be a lie. And I don't think people generally think they are lying. about this. I think people generally think that this is true, and it's fair to say that there's a trans murder epidemic. But as long as we perpetuate these misconceptions, I think we're just doing what white people do best, appropriating from vulnerable minorities. We mustn't forget about these victims. It doesn't matter whether or not there's a trans murder epidemic. If we want to bring down the numbers that you see on the TDAW list, then it would be extremely valuable to put our efforts towards sex workers' rights, racial equality, and economic equality. And there are a lot of trans issues also that still need to be confronted, like suicide and like bathroom rights and prison rights and unemployment. And right, surely if we can fix this problem with unemployment, then trans women won't be put in this financial situation where they're doing such risky work, right? But I think it's an unfair and misguided goal to try and lift some people out of poverty and dangerous work without trying to eradicate poverty and this kind of violence altogether. You could do a Thanos snap and erase all transphobia from the entire universe, and this demographic would still continue to be killed. The best way to ensure the safety of trans women at risk is to ensure that being a woman, being a person of colour, being poor, and being a sex worker are all safe things to be. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.